this is your macroeconomics video on the spending multiplier. As we talked about in the last video, a multiplier can increase economic activity through the circular flow, and there's two ways to do it. One is by adding more money so that we have more spending, and the other way is by cutting taxes. In this video, we're going to talk about the spending multiplier, so injecting new money in order to get people and businesses to spend more. Now, again, this effect is dependent upon the size of our marginal propensity to consume. So here is your equation. Delta Y equals, and then the red box here is what's referred to as the spending multiplier, 1 over 1 minus MPC. And then you multiply that by AAS, which is autonomous aggregate spending. Remember, MPC is the multiplier, or marginal propensity to consume. So if we know that in general our marginal propensity to consume in the aggregate economy is 0.5, this red box will give us a multiplier of 2. As our propensity to consume money goes up, then the multiplier is also higher. So if our MPC is 0.9, we get a multiplier effect of 10. This red box here in this equation can also be replaced with a tax multiplier, which we'll talk about in our next video. Basically, this equation, delta Y, is the change to real GDP. So if we know that we need GDP to rise by a certain amount to get us out of a recession, and we know what our MPC is on average for the United States, let's say it's 0.9 in this case, that will give us a multiplier of 10. Then we just have to figure out how much autonomous aggregate spending is needed. We multiply the new amount of spending times the multiplier of 10, and that will tell us how much we get in new real GDP, or a bigger change to GDP. Now, this is typically done by the government. Government, of course, can spend new money. They can create money through the central bank. They can also borrow money through bonds. Or Congress, of course, can do deficit spending, of which they would have to create the money to do that. This new spending by the government would be delta AAS, or change to government spending. So if the government decided to spend $1.9 trillion and there was an MPC of 0.9, that gives us a multiplier of 10. Then it would, if we multiply those two things together, that would tell us how much real GDP would change due to the increased government spending. Now, the multiplier effect doesn't just have to be government, although that is typically what we think of when the economy is in a recession. The government typically steps in to do stimulus of some sort. So the multiplier effect in general is that each $1 increase in spending, any spending category, so consumption, investment, government, or net exports, will generate more than $1 increase in real GDP, because the money you spent doesn't just stay there. Wherever you spent it, they also pay workers, and those workers are consumers, and the businesses they consume at also pay workers. This also means the reverse is true. So if we decide that we want to remove spending from the economy, we want to encourage savings, or the government cuts spending, then suddenly a multiplied amount of money is removed from the economy as well. So here's an example. Suppose a recession overseas reduces demand for U.S. net exports. If foreigners reduce the amount of their purchasing of American-made products by $10 billion, that spending goes away, but there's also a multiplied effect, because all of these firms who used to sell products to these foreigners now don't have that business. They can't pay their workers don't have money to consume. So initially, aggregate demand is going to go down by 10 billion. But as this money, which was once given to workers and businesses, is no longer spent, then we have a fall in real GDP, which is higher than the $10 billion after everything trickles down. So here's what this looks like on a graph. So let's just say that this is where our price level is, and this is aggregate demand 1. If we go back to our Boeing example, saying Boeing is going to spend $100 billion on planes, or government spending by $100 billion, aggregate demand is going to shift to the right by $100 billion. But as that money trickles its way through the circular flow model and consumers and businesses get that money, we see extra shifts to aggregate demand, and aggregate demand shifts to the right even further. This is the same thing as the circular flow getting larger because there's more money circulating.